Sarah Matthews and her 3-year-old son had always been inseparable, living a quiet, ordinary life in a small, peaceful town, but one Friday night would shatter that peace forever, leaving a community haunted and a mother gone in the most brutal way imaginable. It was a Friday night like any other, and the streets of the small suburban town were quiet, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights reflecting off wet pavement from an earlier drizzle. Sarah Matthews, a 26-year-old mother, was feeling a rare sense of freedom. The past week had been exhausting, long hours at work, endless chores, and the constant responsibility of caring for her 3-year-old son had left her drained. This night was supposed to be hers, a brief escape from the weight of everyday life. She dressed carefully, choosing a casual yet stylish outfit, something that made her feel confident without being flashy. Her friends had been eagerly waiting for her at a local bar, and Sarah was looking forward to laughter, conversation, and a chance to forget the stress of her routine. The bar was buzzing with life, music pulsing through the room, and people moving with an energy that seemed distant from the quietness of the town outside. Sarah slipped into the crowd, greeted by familiar faces, and let herself be carried along by the atmosphere. She laughed at jokes, clinked glasses with her friends, and for a few hours it felt as though her world had shrunk to nothing but music and light-hearted conversation. The weight of responsibility, of sleepless nights and endless lists of things to do, faded with each song. As the night wore on, Sarah stepped outside for a brief moment, taking a deep breath of the cool night air. The streets were quiet, almost empty, and she felt a strange mix of serenity and exhilaration. She glanced at her phone, checking the time and realizing it was already late. The night had passed quickly, each hour filled with laughter and fleeting joy. She knew she would soon have to return to reality, to the life that waited for her at home with her son. When she left the bar, the air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain and pavement. She walked to her car, the sound of her heels echoing softly, and unlocked the door with a practiced motion. The familiar route home should have brought comfort, but that night there was an odd tension in the air, subtle and unplaceable. The streetlights cast long shadows across the sidewalks, and every rustle of leaves or distant car horn seemed amplified. Sarah felt a fleeting sense of unease, but she brushed it off, attributing it to the late hour and her own tiredness. Driving home, she passed empty streets and quiet houses, each one dimly lit and still. Her mind wandered to thoughts of her son, probably sleeping soundly in his bed, unaware that his mother was still out in the night. She thought about the week ahead, the tasks waiting for her, the routines she would resume. For a moment, the thought of returning to her normal life felt heavy, yet comforting, a reminder that some things, at least, remained constant. By the time she parked in her driveway, the town seemed to hold its usual calm, the kind that made people feel safe and secure. Nobody imagined that in just a few hours, that sense of peace would be shattered. Nobody could have predicted that what began as a night of laughter and temporary freedom would end in tragedy, leaving the community in shock and fear. That night, the ordinary became the extraordinary in the worst possible way, and Sarah Matthews' life, full of promise and warmth, would be taken in a way that no one could have foreseen. The following morning, the town woke to a sense of quiet that felt heavier than usual. Neighbors noticed little signs that something was wrong. Sarah Matthews' mailbox was overflowing with letters and advertisements, the kind that normally went unnoticed. Her car remained parked in the driveway, untouched, as if frozen in time. These small details, seemingly insignificant on their own, began to form an unsettling picture. Concerned, one neighbor decided to call the police to check on her well-being. When officers arrived at the modest suburban home, they were met with an eerie silence. The front door was locked, and there were no signs of forced entry, which initially suggested that Sarah might be inside, perhaps asleep or unwell. But as they moved carefully through the rooms, the scene quickly turned horrifying. In the living room, on the floor near the couch, lay Sarah. The attack had been brutal, merciless, and shockingly violent. She had been stabbed 28 times, the wounds chaotic and relentless, indicating a level of rage that stunned even seasoned investigators. Blood had stained the carpet and furniture, evidence of a struggle that had taken place in the confined space of her home. The realization hit the officers hard. This was not a simple accident or a robbery gone wrong. The precision or lack of it of the stabbings suggested a personal attack, something driven by emotion rather than random chance. Her neighbors, who had known Sarah as a cheerful, friendly young mother, were shaken. The thought that someone could commit such a violent act in the quiet, familiar streets of their town was almost impossible to comprehend. Families who had walked those same sidewalks, who had waved to Sarah on morning walks or chatted over fences, suddenly felt exposed to a danger they had never imagined. As investigators examined the scene, they took note of what was missing as much as what was present. There was no evidence of forced entry, no signs that valuables had been taken, and nothing appeared out of place besides the horrific crime itself. It was clear that Sarah might have known her attacker, or at least trusted them enough to allow them inside. Detectives began to reconstruct her movements from the night before, speaking to friends, co-workers, and acquaintances. They painstakingly pieced together her last hours, leaving the bar, walking to her car, the drive home. Each detail was scrutinized for anything that could provide a lead. The news of her death spread quickly, sending shockwaves through the community. Social media lit up with disbelief and sorrow. Neighbors shared memories of Sarah's kindness, and parents worried about the safety of their own children. The idea that someone could commit such a violent act in an otherwise peaceful neighborhood challenged the town's sense of security. The police presence remained heavy for days, with patrols increasing and officers canvassing the area for any overlooked clues. Detectives also began to speak with Sarah's friends, trying to understand her state of mind, her relationships, and any possible conflicts that could explain the attack. But every lead seemed to hit a wall. Sarah had been careful, cautious, and friendly with everyone she knew. Nothing in her recent life suggested she was in danger. The combination of a vicious murder and a lack of immediate suspects left investigators frustrated and the community fearful. Everyone wanted answers, but the case remained shrouded in mystery. The simple routine of a Friday night turned into an unspeakable tragedy that no one could easily explain or forget. As the investigation progressed, detectives began uncovering details about Sarah Matthews' life that painted a more complex picture than anyone in the town had imagined. On the surface, she seemed to live an ordinary, happy life, a devoted mother, a diligent employee, and a friendly neighbor. But behind closed doors, she had been facing pressures and challenges that were invisible to most. Work had been increasingly demanding, leaving her exhausted by the end of each day, and she had been struggling to balance her responsibilities as a single mother with the demands of a career she relied on to support her child. Friends mentioned subtle tensions in her social circle, small disagreements that seemed trivial at the time but hinted at undercurrents of stress in her personal life. Forensics provided the first unexpected clue. While the initial examination of the scene had revealed no obvious signs of forced entry, DNA analysis detected genetic material that did not match anyone in her immediate family or close friends. It was an unsettling discovery, suggesting that the attacker had been someone outside her trusted circle. Investigators knew that this could be the key to solving the case, but identifying the person would be far from easy. The DNA traces were limited, partial, and required careful handling to ensure accuracy. Every hour that passed without a lead increased the pressure on law enforcement and deepened the anxiety of a community still reeling from the shock of Sarah's death. Meanwhile, detectives studied surveillance footage from the bar and surrounding streets. In one grainy clip, a shadowy figure appeared to follow Sarah as she left the building. The image was unclear, the face unrecognizable, but the figure's presence was undeniable. The footage did not reveal a vehicle or clear direction of travel, leaving investigators with little more than confirmation that Sarah had been watched that night. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible piece of the puzzle, yet it raised a chilling possibility. The attack had not been entirely spontaneous. Someone had been observing her, perhaps planning what would unfold later. Another lead emerged from a local delivery driver who remembered seeing a suspicious van parked near Sarah S. Street in the early hours. The vehicle had no identifiable markings, and the driver had dismissed it at the time as a minor curiosity. When questioned weeks later, the detail became crucial. Investigators traced the van's registration and discovered it had been rented under a false identity, further confirming that the killer had gone to great lengths to remain undetected. Each new discovery seemed to point in multiple directions, complicating the investigation and creating an atmosphere of uncertainty. Detectives also began to examine Sarah's recent interactions, both in person and online. They found evidence of strained friendships, cryptic messages, and subtle threats that had gone unnoticed. While nothing directly implicated anyone at that stage, the information revealed a pattern of tension in her life that could have made her vulnerable. The investigation was no longer about random violence. It was now a methodical search for someone who had observed, planned, and executed a brutal act with precision. The combination of DNA evidence, surveillance footage, and witness reports painted a chilling picture. Sarah's death was not a random tragedy. It was the result of someone watching her closely, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Each clue added another layer of suspense, keeping investigators and the town on edge as the mystery of who could commit such a violent act and why continued to grow darker and more complex. Weeks into the investigation, detectives received a breakthrough that shocked everyone involved. After careful processing, the DNA recovered from the scene matched a man with no prior criminal record, a quiet neighbor who lived just a few blocks from Sarah Matthews. On the surface, he had appeared ordinary, polite, friendly, and largely unnoticed by those around him. His calm, unassuming demeanor had hidden a darker side that no one could have imagined. Friends and neighbors struggled to reconcile the idea that someone they had casually greeted or waved to could be capable of such extreme violence. Investigators immediately began to dig into his background, searching for any signs of past aggression or mental instability. They found none of the criminal history that might have warned the community. On paper, he was ordinary, steady employment, no prior arrests, and relationships that seemed stable. Yet, evidence collected from his home told a different story. Hidden in a small, inconspicuous journal were entries that revealed a growing obsession with Sarah Matthews. The writings were meticulous, detailing her daily routines, her movements, and even her habits at home. The obsession appeared to have escalated over months, culminating in the violent act that had taken her life. Further investigation revealed that he had tried to cover his tracks in subtle ways. Sarah's phone, which he had taken after the attack, was damaged in an attempt to erase digital evidence. His attempts were clumsy, however, and forensic experts were able to recover information that placed him near Sarah's home the night of the murder. Surveillance footage, previously unclear, was re-examined with advanced techniques, and analysts were able to confirm the figure following Sarah from the bar matched his build and gait. Each piece of evidence added weight to the case, creating a clear connection between him and the crime. The motive behind the attack remained partly mysterious, even as evidence of the obsession came to light. There were no arguments, no prior confrontations, and no apparent financial gain. It became increasingly evident that the crime had been driven by a disturbing fixation rather than traditional reasons like revenge or robbery. Investigators described it as a calculated act of violence executed with premeditation but carried out in a way that seemed almost random to an outside observer. The meticulous planning contrasted sharply with the chaotic brutality of the attack itself, creating a chilling picture of someone who had spent months thinking about committing murder while still maintaining the appearance of normalcy in daily life. The revelation of the neighbor as the perpetrator sent shockwaves through the town. People who had lived alongside him, interacted with him, and considered him harmless now viewed their community through a lens of fear and suspicion. Conversations in the grocery store, at the park, and on the sidewalks shifted from ordinary pleasantries to hushed discussions of danger, trust, and the darkness that can hide behind familiar faces. The idea that someone so close could harbor violent intentions left a lasting sense of unease. Families began to question how well they really knew the people around them, and the once trusted streets felt strange and unfamiliar. The discovery of the killer's identity marked a turning point in the case. It gave detectives the concrete lead they had been searching for and transformed the investigation from a search through uncertainty into a confrontation with a chilling reality. The person responsible for Sarah's death had lived quietly among them unnoticed until the truth could no longer be hidden. The small, peaceful neighborhood would never look the same again. The arrest of Sarah Matthews' neighbor brought a mixture of relief and disbelief to the community. Relief because the person responsible for such a brutal act was finally identified and in custody, and disbelief because the individual had appeared ordinary, even trustworthy, to everyone around him. As the investigation transitioned into the legal phase, prosecutors built a case based on DNA evidence, recovered journals, surveillance footage, and the digital traces of the crime. The evidence was overwhelming, leaving little room for doubt, yet the trial drew intense public attention, shining a spotlight on a town that had once felt completely safe. In court, the details of the crime were laid bare. The brutality of the stabbing, the obsessive behavior of the killer, and the meticulous planning were presented systematically, piece by piece. Jurors were shown the recovered journal entries, each page revealing a fixation on Sarah's daily life, her movements, and even her social interactions. Experts explained how someone could maintain a facade of normalcy while harboring violent intentions, and forensic evidence confirmed that the attack had been deliberate, premeditated, and extraordinarily violent. The town watched closely as the case unfolded, many residents attending court proceedings to see justice served for a woman they had known, admired, and trusted. The trial also revealed the devastating ripple effects of the crime. Sarah's young son, too small to fully understand the loss, faced a world without his mother's care and presence. Friends and family struggled to cope with grief while simultaneously confronting the terrifying reality that someone from their own neighborhood had committed the act. The community organized vigils and memorials, remembering Sarah for her warmth, her dedication to her son, and the kindness she had shown to those around her. The tragedy became a shared experience, drawing neighbors closer together even as it left a permanent scar on the town's sense of safety. As the trial concluded, the jury delivered a guilty verdict. The man who had seemed ordinary in everyday life was convicted of murder, his carefully hidden obsession laid bare for all to see. The sentence, though severe, brought a sense of closure for many who had been haunted by the randomness of the attack and the unanswered questions about motive and opportunity. While justice was served in a legal sense, the emotional aftermath lingered. The community had been forever altered by the realization that danger can exist even in the most familiar places and that appearances can be deceiving. In the months following the conviction, Sarah's friends and family established a foundation in her memory, dedicated to raising awareness about violence, supporting victims' families, and promoting community vigilance. The initiative helped channel grief into purpose, providing a tangible way to honor her life and legacy. Neighbors who had once walked past each other without much thought now spoke with more awareness, creating networks of support and attention that strengthened the bonds within the community. Though the immediate threat had been removed, the memory of that night remained vivid. The streets where Sarah had lived and been taken were never quite the same, and the quiet suburban town carried with it a lasting reminder that tragedy can strike unexpectedly. The story of Sarah Matthews became more than a criminal case. It became a lesson in vigilance, awareness, and the fragility of safety. Her life, though cut tragically short, left an enduring impact on those who knew her and on a town that would never forget the night that changed everything.